Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second luncheon in the Fall Faculty Luncheon Series. My name is Robert Ross, Research Associate in Meteorology in the Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Science Department, and the organizer and moderator of this fall's luncheon series. The title of our series is Unity and Diversity. An academic community reflects on the three cultures, the humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences. Our overall goal is to explore possible interactions among these three great areas of scholarship, searching for points of connectivity among them for the potential betterment of the university and to establish a better foundation to approach and solve the world's pressing problems. Our first luncheon speaker, Dr. Jay Clayton of Vanderbilt University, representing the humanities, made the case for a transdisciplinary approach rather than an interdisciplinary approach to the interaction among the disciplines. In his model, the various disciplines would exchange information with each other while maintaining individual disciplinary integrity. Dr. Clayton was wary of attempts to effect a grand synthesis or unification of the various disciplines. You can view the webcast of his presentation on the Luncheon Series website, which is listed at the top of your Luncheon Series handout on the table there. Today we will explore the three-culture interaction from the perspective of the social sciences. Our speaker, Dr. Elaine Howard Ecklund, is an associate professor of sociology at Rice University, where she studies cultural change in the areas of religion, immigration, and science. She is also director of the Religion and Public Life program at the Social Sciences Research Institute and a scholar in the Baker Institute for Public Policy, all at Rice. Dr. Ecklund's research focuses on how science and religion intersect with public life, and she also does research on immigration and gender issues. She is primarily interested in how individuals develop cognitive schema, ways of interpreting the world that are at odds with the institutions that constrain them. She then examines how these individuals use their schema to bring changes to these institutions. I think this is really fascinating, and it's a real study of how an individual potentially can change a huge organization. It's a very fascinating area of research. Dr. Ecklund has published 25 peer-reviewed articles and two books with Oxford University Press. Her work has appeared in the Annual Review of Sociology, Social Forces, and American Behavioral Scientists, as well as the Washington Post, the Houston Chronicle, USA Today, and the Huffington Post, among other publications. Her latest book, Science versus Religion, What Scientists Really Think, was published by Oxford University Press in May 2010. Dr. Ecklund received BS, MA, and PhD degrees from Cornell University. The title of her talk today is How the Social Sciences May Inform and Be Informed by the Humanities and Natural Sciences. Dr. Ecklund, it is truly a pleasure to welcome you to Florida State University and to the Faculty Luncheon Series. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here, and especially to Bob Ross, who organized this visit and who's been a gracious host. I also want to thank the Department of Sociology and Sociology Chair Ike Eberstein, as well as the Department of Religion and John Corrigan, the chair of that department, who have kindly agreed to host me for yet more other lectures on my specific research areas. This is my first time at Florida State University, and it's a true pleasure to spend time at this impressive academic institution. I got a nice tour of the campus, and it's absolutely beautiful. I think certainly defying stereotypes of state universities, it rivals anything I've seen anyplace. So thank you so much again. Bob gave me, of course, a very generous introduction, but he didn't tell you the real reason that I'm equipped to give a lecture about how the social sciences can inform and be informed by the humanities, and especially the natural sciences. It's because I live in an interdisciplinary marriage. My husband is a particle physicist, and I'm a sociologist, so we sort of deal with this around the dinner table trying to figure out, how our disciplines can inform or be informed by, right, the other. So I notice when we get at social gatherings together that people have two very different kinds of responses to our disciplines. So when my husband says that he is a particle physicist, the response usually goes somewhere along the line of, oh my gosh, that must be so hard. Or physics wasn't, a class I especially liked in high school, but you must be so smart. And not to put down my own discipline, but people have a very distinctly different response when I say that I'm a sociologist. Usually the response is, now my son has this problem. And then I say, well, I'm not actually a social worker, not that that would be a bad thing to be. That is a very impressive discipline as well, and anyone who knows me well knows me, I do not have the skills to do it. But I am a sociologist. We study groups, and they're like, oh, interesting. So, something like, how do you make a living doing that, or something like that. So I digress, but I will come back to that story a little bit and what it says about some of the cultures of the disciplines and perhaps how it's exemplary, those kinds of public responses of some of the barriers, the barrier of power structures between the disciplines, and how that then forms a barrier for us having interdisciplinary dialogue, exchange, and work. So the workshop has been drawing on the following questions generated in part on C.P. Snow's work, The Two Cultures, and which we've broadened in this workshop, Bob tells me, to really expand to 3 cultures, including my discipline, sociology, which is, of course, to some extent exemplary of the social sciences. So we're looking at questions like, how might each culture be informed and informed by the other 2 cultures? Can a greater interaction among the 3 cultures lead to solving the world's problems? Can a greater interaction lead to a better university? Can we develop a greater interaction even? Can we develop a great curriculum? My answer to these questions is yes, yes, and yes, and yes in my case. The culture of the social sciences, and in there I include psychology, anthropology, sociology, political science, economics, and others, has been deeply influenced by the natural sciences and the humanities, and in some ways, some would argue, is born from them. I will deal with 3 kinds of questions here today that I think help us answer these broader questions. The first, why is interdisciplinary interaction and perhaps even interdisciplinary scholarship even important at all? I think we need to grapple with that basic question a little bit. Second, how can the social sciences benefit from and inform the natural sciences and humanities? And what are some of the impediments, thirdly, what are some of the impediments to interdisciplinary work? And I'll try to analyze things a little bit from my own perspective as a sociologist, as well as of course, the corresponding issue is what are some of the solutions. First, why should we do interdisciplinary work at all? A definition of interdisciplinarity, a working definition, I think might be helpful here. I mean something like when both natural and social scientists join with humanists to work on a social problem like rectifying health inequalities in society, as well as when a scholar takes on insights from another discipline in a way that fundamentally changes their work. So I mean both what I think your previous speaker meant as transdisciplinarity, as well as actually disciplines which become themselves integrated and very interdisciplinary in the kind of work that they do. Can a greater interaction among disciplines in this way lead to solving the world's problems? I think this is a very lofty goal. I'm a bit of an idealist, so I like to set out the biggest goals we can attain. And it can work, certainly, for some problems better than others. But here, too, I think there is a resounding yes, that a flagship school like Florida State University is having these discussions ought to be applauded and seen as truly revolutionary by the broader university community. Interdisciplinarity is not just a kind of intellectual ideal, but a very practical necessity given the complexity of kind of the intellectual and some of the social problems that we face today. Bob, was kind enough to put out an article which I've written for the Chronicle of Higher Education, and where I argue, simply to be provocative, because they asked me to be in this article, that the next big idea of the university may to be abandon some of our disciplinary structures altogether. So I'll just read a bit from that article, that questions such as how we can prevent environmental devastation, how can we treat cancer more effectively, how do we understand religious experiences, those questions seem inherently to be the domain of one discipline, but if we delve a bit deeper, answer any of them requires ultimately knowledge of more than one discipline. So to protect the environment, we need to understand both the science of climate change as well as things like the religious motivation to care for the environment. Cancer treatment has as much to do with access to medical care in some ways as it does with the etiology of cells gone awry. And religious experience is now the domain of neuroscience as much as it is the domain of anthropology and history. So if we're ever going to meet the scholarly and public challenges, increasingly even the kind of public challenges that face the very existence of the university. Universities in some ways are under question by the broader culture right now. I think this kind of discussion of how we can join together across disciplines is especially relevant at this time period. And so I'm very, very pleased that so many came out today to have this discussion with me. So we may want to start thinking beyond our disciplinary borders, sort of as a course of the way that we do things, and how else will scholars be learned to think beyond these borders than joining together in groups to have these kinds of discussions. So I think we're taking an important first step here. Second, let me turn the lens on myself, right, on my own area of the social sciences and reflect with me for a minute on that. And it was with a bit of trepidation that I came up with these remarks, and you realize how entrenched the disciplinary boundaries are, because I thought, ooh, you know, will I really say things that are meaningful to a psychologist or an economist? Maybe they won't like what I say. So, you know, we really can only comment on our own disciplines, and when we even try to lump something together like all of the social sciences, you know, there are concerns about how much I can represent my fellow members of the social sciences from the perspective of sociology, so I hope you'll be patient with me. I'm just going to put myself out there. So first, what can the humanities give to the social sciences? Anthony Appia, who's the Lawrence Rockefeller University professor of philosophy at Princeton University, said in a recent article for the Chronicle of Higher Education, June 3rd, 2011, if you want to look it up, that I started philosophy looking for answers, but along the way, I came to prize exploring the questions. Progress in philosophy consists, I think, in a clearer delineation of the conceptual options, not always in teaching determinate conclusions. Philosophy, history, literary studies all bring to the social sciences a deeper exploration of what the real questions are, what the most basic questions are that are facing humanity. By training, I'm a sociologist, but I like to think of my scholarship drawing on insights from the social sciences as well as the humanities and even the natural sciences. The most recent project that I've done on science and religion I see as my most interdisciplinary to date. The book presents the views of scientists at top research universities from 7 natural and social science disciplines. And to tell their stories, I draw on data collected over about a 4-year period, including a survey of 1,700 as well as one-on-one conversations with 275 of them. In their interviews and survey responses, these scientists revealed to me what they think about religion, spirituality, public conflicts between science and religion, the role of religion in teaching, other kinds of things. Although my book certainly would not pass muster as a philosophical text, and so I wouldn't want it to be held under that kind of scrutiny. I took a lot of philosophy classes as an undergraduate at Cornell University, and I had just enough taste to know how hard it really is. So my hat's off to any philosophers in the room. Philosophy pushes the social sciences, and these disciplines that are engaged in describing behavior to ask larger and bigger questions, not just about why people get into groups, what they do, but also the questions about the meaning of life, what better worlds might be like. In my own scholarship, historian of science Ronald Numbers, who's the Hilldale Professor of the History of Science and Medicine at the University of Wisconsin, has been something of a mentor to me and help me to understand how scientists' views on religion are, of course, it seems that I would have known this all along, but somehow it was skipped a little bit in my training, are, of course, deeply embedded in historical conflicts and cohesions between religion and science, and how some of what we take for granted even today as current modern-day realities have a historical legacy that informs our present-day understandings of science and religion. And maybe our present-day understandings can even be refashioned in light of those historical understandings. He's written this really interesting book. He's actually the editor of it, called Galileo Goes to Jail and Other Myths About Science and Religion, which came out with Harvard University Press in 2009. History pushes those in the social sciences who, with the exception of those who focus on political history or historical sociology, to ask questions about how present-day social realities are deeply embedded in history. Sometimes it seems that the social sciences want to forget their humanist roots, and here's where I feel like I might be stepping into dangerous waters. In the desire to quest after what we perceive as a more scientific study of the social world. But humanists remind us that it is humans themselves who study the social world. And while there are better or worse methods for particular research questions, we're still fundamentally limited by our own social realities, and it's the peril of our scholarship if we pretend that this is not the case. Now I'll move on. What have the natural sciences given the social sciences? Here I think there's a bit more of a kind of fraught relationship in some ways. The social sciences have benefited incredibly from the natural sciences, although often we feel like we live in the shadow of our bigger brother. This is in my study of how scientists think about religion. For the sake of parsimony, I called everyone scientists, and I've gotten all kinds of response for this. It was kind of a decision I made in conjunction with my editor. But interestingly, none of the social scientists that I interviewed, with the exception of one anthropologist who was moonlighting in a sociology department, actually questioned my definition of them as a scientist, which I think is very, very telling, at least of how the social sciences think about themselves at elite research universities. Social sciences live so much in the shadow of natural science that it's hard sometimes to even reflect on the nuances of this relationship. So the relationship between these two groups is sometimes uncomfortable, but usually they're of one mind in the defense of science. Both see themselves as engaged in a search for the truth of scientific fact. There was little difference, for example, in my study. Keep in mind that I included just the disciplines of psychology, economics, political science, and sociology. I did not include anthropology, where I think the conversation is a little bit more fraught about what counts as social science and what counts as humanities. But there was very little differences between the natural and social science disciplines that I studied in their religious propensities, which shows that they're in some ways converging more in how they see the world rather than diverging. In fact, the definition of social scientists, when I asked them to define what they meant by science, was very, very similar to the definitions that the natural sciences give. So, for example, I'll quote to you a sociologist in his late 30s at a Midwest research university who explained, in his view of things, doing research was perfectly in line with many of the natural scientists he knows. He said, there is this idea of there being some kind of objective reality, and then the task of what I do as a scientist, he even calls himself a scientist, is to try to understand that reality on the basis of evidence and logic and proof. And as I said, this was a view of science that fit perfectly in how most of the natural scientists in my sample described their work. There is much to be commended about this. Social sciences have gained from the natural sciences rigorous quantification of social phenomenon, such as group networks. The kind of advanced modeling of human behavior processes that we now take for granted was almost unheard of 50 or 70 years ago. This is evident from merely flipping through old pages of the American Journal of Sociology or the American Sociological Review, two of the flagship journals in my field, where what we even think of as good methods has changed drastically over the past half century. The social sciences, to go a little further, I think, are also gaining something from the structure of the natural sciences. The structure of the whole research endeavor has changed immensely. In my own field of sociology, about 100 years ago, a classic like William Foote White's famous Street Corner Society, the social structure of an Italian slum, White, who taught for many years at Cornell University, where I graduated, stood literally on a street corner, right, hence called Street Corner Society, taking notes, right? The amount of funding needed for this data collection perhaps involved enough to purchase a pad of paper and a pencil to furtively take notes on your respondents. When I've done qualitative work, I always escape away to the bathroom to take notes on my respondents. I always wonder why I spend so much time there. Now, though, things are transitioning, so even researchers like myself who focus primarily on qualitative methods are experiencing a quantification of qualitative methods. So I routinely apply for grants of several $100,000 to do hundreds of interviews rather than tens of interviews, analyze these textual materials with quantitative methods, and in the end even analyze them sometimes statistically. In my estimation, this is part of a much broader and bigger push for a larger effort to quantify the social sciences in our quest to mirror the natural sciences. And as I said, I think some parts of that are very good. It means that social scientists cannot say that work has scientific merit when data sets are not large enough, representative enough, or rigorously analyzed enough. And I see there as being some fundamental good things for scholarship in there. As I said, that social scientists have gained from the natural sciences this different structure and way of doing things. Research teams, especially in psychology, for example, and even in my own field of sociology, are often much larger, drawing on different scholars' propensities for, say, methodologically or theoretically. These larger teams feel a practical necessity of the projects just being larger, needing to get more work done, but they also feel the need of involving the perspectives of different scholars on the same project, which seems inherently like a good thing for scholarship as well. When asking the question of what the social sciences give to the humanities and the natural sciences, I feel like I need to be significantly more modest. Figuring out what the social sciences give to the humanities and natural science, I think, is best discerned by asking them. A colleague and close friend of mine at Rice University who's in philosophy has talked to me about how delving more deeply into the methods and understandings of contemporary group-level processes that I take for granted as a social scientist have pushed her in her own work as a philosopher to consider the importance of how the kinds of arguments she makes in philosophy play out in real people's lives in current contexts. And that's really enlivened her work, she thinks. In my conversations with natural scientists, they've expressed that, in fact, I just had a conversation about this topic with Neil Lane, who's visiting you next month, when you'll love talking with him. He's a wonderful, wonderful person. That social sciences give to the natural sciences theories and methodological tools to better reflect on the structure of their discipline, particularly helping them answer questions about the social stratification of their discipline, for example. In research I'm doing with Ann Lincoln at Southern Methodist University, we're examining how men and women in biology and physics at top research universities understand the presence of absence of women in the discipline, how both men and women understand the connection of their work as scientists to their family lives. We just published an article on this topic in the journal PLOS One in an effort in part to engage the scientific community. The article is called Scientists Want More Children, but it's also, we hope to continue to engage in interdisciplinary efforts through this work, because it would be silly not to, because we are studying the scientific community and we hope to be able to be in conversation with them about what they think about our results, and also to give back to them for all those interviews that they did with us, right? So third and last, if we all agree that there ought to be more interdisciplinary work, then why isn't there, and how can we get from here to there? That's the hard part. I find actually that people generally seem to be pretty open to disciplinary work and how they, interdisciplinary work and how they talk about things. These are, of course, just my anecdotal reflections from my social circles, but I meet very few scholars who say something like, you know, I'm really about policing the boundaries of my own discipline, and, you know, don't really talk to me if you're, you know, if I'm a philosopher, don't talk to me, you physicist. You know, I don't really see that. I find that most of the faculty I interact with are pretty collegial about this kind of work, think it's a good thing. University administrators generally think it's a good thing. But let's reflect on this. Let me now go into my disciplinary toolkit of sociology and actually bring some of the theories and concepts that we use in sociology to reflect on this. I see some different kinds of barriers, structural barriers, which I see as institutions, patterns of behavior that result from institutions, as well as cultural barriers, which in sociology we would think of in part as shared attitudes, languages, beliefs, and goals that are really pretty profound barriers that need to be overcome when it comes to doing interdisciplinary work or even engaging in interdisciplinary discussions. First, a structural reason is that it's hard to do interdisciplinary work because it is extremely difficult to break down interdisciplinary boundaries. As the historian Myron Gutman of the National Science Foundation has observed, many universities have a hard time embracing interdisciplinary work, in part because the tenure and promotion process is not designed to properly evaluate interdisciplinarity. In fact, our entire tenure and promotion system is controlled by disciplinary review boards that measure how individual scholars stack up against other scholars in their same discipline. How can we evaluate the tenure cases of interdisciplinary scholars? How can we incentivize interdisciplinary work when research money, departments, promotion committees are constructed along disciplinary borders? I think that how we respond to such structures and even refashion them will help us refashion universities in the next decades. Universities have traditionally prized disciplinary specificity and purity, but that approach may be ill-equipped to nurture the kind of expansive, creative, multi-pronged thinking that may be needed to defend our cultural space in the current society, and more importantly, to meet our biggest and most pressing intellectual and social problems. As we've said, universities are structured according to departments, decanal units, university units, and these initiatives for interdisciplinarity I'm noticing as I've traveled to different universities often come from a president's office or at the provost level. At my own university, Rice University, which has as part of its vision a commitment to transforming the world with an uncommon approach to research and education and to promoting an unconventional wisdom, is, I think, uncharacteristically affirming and supportive of interdisciplinary measures. But we have some things going for us in that regard. In our smallness of size, there's something there about smallness of size and smallness of faculty, which frankly makes it easier to walk across the campus and have a conversation with your colleague for, in my case, in sociology or economics, but even for my colleagues in religious studies and chemistry. I think it's significantly harder in larger institutions. But I've noticed that these are often initiatives at the university level which include generous pots of seed funding for interdisciplinary work, so there's something to be said for it starting at the top and working its way down. We have bodies on campus at Rice University, such as the Religion and Public Life program, which I direct in collaboration with faculty from different disciplines across the university. Those from economics have been involved in our program, history, natural sciences, and of course, religious studies. We house 13 student fellows, undergraduates from different disciplines outside sociology, as well as a postdoctoral fellow and a graduate student. I'm also involved in Scientia Institute at Rice that brings together humanists, social scientists, and natural scientists to discuss the culture and history of science, as well as Bob mentioned, the Baker Institute for Public Policy at Rice University, where Neil Lane is as well, and he directs the Science and Technology Policy Program. These initiatives are often put forth by faculty who are further along in their careers, someone like Lane, who has succeeded, who has made it through the ranks, through the tenure track process, and even to a named chair position, and Lane was also director of the National Science Foundation. And so someone like Neil has the kind of gravitas and the kind of protected space to really spearhead some of these kinds of initiatives. So at the structural level, we need more leaders at the level of the university university and provost level who are willing to spearhead these kinds of initiatives. I've also noticed that such initiatives like the ones I've mentioned at Rice, and I've gotten to know some of those similar initiatives here at Florida State, rarely emanate from departments themselves. I don't see ads, say, coming out of my own department that reads something like sociologist seeks even psychologist or economist, let alone sociologist seeks biologist or chemist to work with on a project. That's like my marital ad or something, but not, for my scholarship. The crucial barrier is that we be taken seriously in our guild, right? We need to speak to the dominant conversations within our discipline, or we won't be seen as relevant to our discipline. And these kinds of concerns are very real at the structural level. For example, knowing that as a sociologist of religion and now adding science, sociology of science and sociology of gender to that mix, that I'm prone to interdisciplinary conversations, and I frankly dislike that kind of work. A mentor, a senior mentor who wanted me very much to succeed, gave me the advice that for every article I publish in a journal outside my own discipline, I need to make sure that I publish one inside my own discipline. The university is set up structurally, and until, according to these disciplinary pathways, and until tenure and promotion happens through university centers and institutes and not through departments, it will be oriented towards our own departments, our scholarship will. So that's something that needs to be overcome. I also teach my students that our lives are shaped by and shape culture. I want to talk about two cultural factors that need to be overcome within university structures, and I think these will be perhaps easier and maybe even have a more profound impact and can start from the ground up. There's a lack, first, of a shared language between the disciplines, among the disciplines, and also there's a lack of an understanding, or at least there may be an understanding, but there's not a front stage conversation about the power structures that occur among disciplines and between disciplines. The challenge in terms of language for natural scientists is that they are studying parts of the material world that make people who are not aware of challenge. They have concepts like, for example, semi-electronic decay, that the ordinary person is not aware of. And scientists take these concepts, they enlighten students to be aware of the intricacies and beauty of the material world, they make it understandable. But the challenge is that these disciplines are so specific in terminology and language that can feel very foreboding to those outside the disciplines, even other scholars, let alone students. And in social science, I see our task more as making what people see as commonplace understood to be more complex. So we often do this, I notice, by taking common words and giving them more obscure meanings. So, our motto is something like culture. It's not what you think it is, right? So in order to go forward in interdisciplinary dialogue, we need to move towards more social spaces where there are shared languages, and have even more incentives from higher level structures to do interdisciplinary work, while at the same time department leaders make overtures to other departments to join together where there are shared substantive interests and to learn how to translate our work more reflectively to one another. For example, in the same kind of skills that we use when we translate our work to intro-level undergraduates. I think we need to think more creatively about employing those same skills when we talk about our colleagues. Not in a way that's infantilizing or dumbs down the research, but sometimes I wonder if I really know what I'm talking about if I can't explain it to someone who's outside my discipline. So it's a little bit of an intellectual test, I think, for us as well. There are not just structures of power, which we're all aware of, who has power and who has less so in universities, but there are also cultures of power. So in terms of Irving Goffman, the social psychologist whose work bridges the social sciences of psychology and sociology, he talks about backstage conversations and front stage conversations, which I think the terminology is pretty easily explainable, but the basic idea is there are things that are there, that are present, that are in the backstage that we don't really talk about. And some of those in this kind of conversation need to be brought to the front stage, need to be brought out to the open for everyone to see. I think this will require invoking principles of humility about the limits of our own discipline. We've been schooled in departments as graduate students to think that our disciplines are the best, and you need a little bit of that kind of hubris to make it, right? To get through all of those rejections from grants and articles. I think I hit an all-time record high the other week. I think I got rejected from 3 articles and 2 grants in 1 week or something like that, but then I had a couple of acceptances last week, so it's ebbs and flows. And even, having been in this business a little while now, it still hurts, right? So you need to develop that kind of intellectual feeling of superiority to say, what I'm doing really does make a difference, and it is going to transform the world in some kind of meaningful way. And that kind of hubris, I think, hurts us when it comes to interdisciplinarity, the kinds of power structures and the way that we enact, to use sort of Goffman terms, those power structures in cultural ways. So it will require invoking principles of humility about the limits of our discipline. Although we sometimes, for example, act as if we believe it, there are very few who think that science, for example, can answer every scholarly question that's worth asking. And I can say this with some degree of empirical backing, since I sat in the offices and labs of 275 natural and social scientists and asked them what they thought about questions that have to do with the meaning of life. And even at our top universities, top scientists at those top universities were generally unwilling to say that science has all the answers to questions that are important to be asking, meaning that even they see a need to be in dialogue with humanities and social sciences. But what is said behind closed doors in the safe space of a confidential research study perhaps needs to be brought up more front. For some disciplines, this will mean responding to others with a sense of humility, to listening how others outside our disciplinary guild see the importance of their worlds and the importance of their own scholarship. And professors are frankly not really known for being good at listening. Have you ever noticed that? I noticed this recently. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and she's just learning how to talk. And one of the things, I know for those of you who have or have had young children, they mimic you a lot, right? So, and that can be very humbling, because it is like holding up a mirror to your own behavior. And one thing she likes to mimic me doing is talking on the phone to my students. And the way that she mimics is like this. She puts a fake phone up to her ear and she goes, blah, 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 uh-huh, blah, 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 uh-huh, blah, 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 uh-huh, which shows me that I do a lot more talking than listening, right? Because the uh-huh, which is like the listening behavior, is very, very short and is only is sort of almost a punctuation for the blah, 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 blah. So she obviously is picking up something very quickly, which is making me realize, how I sound to others. So it's very enlightening. Listening to the value of other disciplines will go a long way towards the possibility of understanding the value of disciplines outside our own, to becoming truly imaginative about what interdisciplinary collaboration might look like, how other disciplines might even change and refashion our own work. We live in a time period where universities, unfortunately, are under scrutiny from the public about how utilitarian they are for students. There are very practical reasons, then, to consider the possible benefits that interdisciplinary collaboration may allow for, say, more funding in the face of constant university budget cuts. But there are also higher order reasons, which you don't go into scholarship certainly for the money. That, for example, there are also higher order reasons for broadening our own minds, which are really, I think, the reason that most of us become scholars. The benefits of teaching courses that draw diverse groups of students outside our own majors, for example, and developing deeper and broader answers to the most pressing research questions, and perhaps more importantly, the most pressing societal concerns of our time. Thank you. I'm very happy to entertain questions now. I'm sure you have some. Yeah, Tom.
I'm sick of all this
Okay.
Excuse me, please talk into this.
Yes, I should tell you, you should wait until Bob brings the microphone to you to talk, and that you are being recorded. But carry on.
Should all science be interdisciplinary?
Tom's question is, should all science be interdisciplinary? I think in the natural sciences, there's perhaps the least problem in terms of natural sciences interfacing with one another. I mean, we have entire disciplines of science now that are inherently interdisciplinary, right? So I don't see as much of the need for boundary crossing happening in the sciences itself, from different disciplines of science to one another. I would see more of a need for social sciences and natural sciences in conversation with humanists and other words. And I'm not sure it needs to be happening everywhere all the time. That it's more in terms of, I was asked to give a lecture on interdisciplinarity, so I'm coming off as very positive. And so then a kind of disclaimer to this sort of movement would be, let's understand the places where it's most valuable and the places where it's not as necessary, and highly prioritize our initiatives around where it's most necessary. So, I'm in Houston, Texas, which is home to a wonderful medical facilities of various types and medical schools. We're right there. So it would be silly, I think, for sociologists who study the social factors that have an impact on health to not even consider what biologists or faculty in the School of Medicine who do the medical sciences, how they're thinking about these issues. That would just seem to be ignoring part of the picture. But yet there are real disciplinary differences, right, among those types of disciplines, biologists, sociologists, and professors of medicine, even between people who do research biology and professors of medicine, where you would think of the connection as being even stronger. There are still very real disciplinary boundaries and barriers that need to be overcome to figure out how to apply for grants together, say, to do research that appears cutting edge in the field of health. I went on too long. Are you? Yeah. That's a good question, though. Yeah. I guess Pam, and then Bob will bring you the microphone.
Okay. What I was wondering about is your discussion in terms of how the process for tenure review is very discipline specific. And I was thinking about how there's value to training people early in their careers to think broadly beyond their discipline, but at the same time value to making sure that people have mastered their own discipline before they start trying to engage in interdisciplinary endeavors. And I'm wondering sort of where do you find the sort of balance between those two ideas?
I think that's really where the rubber meets the road in terms of practicality of this whole discussion. So I was just at a conversation with directors of graduate studies at Rice. I'm director of graduate studies of our PhD program there. And one of the persons, well, I don't even want to name their discipline, said, I got to be honest with you, I'm not concerned about having my students really learn interdisciplinary kinds of language. I really need them to master their own discipline, that's extremely important, and that's something for scholars who are further along in their career to get involved in once they have the freedom of tenure. And I think I really understand that kind of thinking, and I think there's a lot of wisdom to that. On the other hand, if we don't teach students from the get-go how to be conversant in conversations outside their own discipline, it's not that I as a sociologist need to learn how to be a chemist. It's more that as it's a relevant interface for the kind of substantive work that I do, then I need to learn how to be able to explain what I do to someone who is in that other discipline, right? So it's not that I'm calling for you to get 5 PhDs. It's more that can we develop shared spaces where language, where we can have shared languages to discuss these kinds of things. If we don't teach students or even share with students that that is a possibility or a good thing to be doing, then I wonder if they'll all of a sudden pick it up when they're full professors, right? We don't just transition into different kinds of people as we pass through the tenure process. Well, a little bit, but. Yeah.
Hi, Micah Vandergrift. I'm from University Libraries here.
Mark?
Micah.
Micah,
Yeah.
sorry.
I'm just wondering what role sharing data or open data might do for breaking down some of these barriers.
I laugh because I'm starting to realize that there are different conventions in disciplines, not just in how we report data. So we were kind of talking about that a little bit, Tom, last night at dinner. But there are also differences in conventions about who owns data, when we share it in the process. So I'm kind of laughing because I'm running into a little bit of that right now in a project that I'm involved in. So that seems like an ideal way, right, to share data, to get data on, say, we might think about it, the social sciences at different levels of analysis of some kind of group process that's going on. Psychologists might be involved in one kind of level of analysis, and sociologists in another, and economists in another, or different pieces of a social problem that we're all working on together. That would seem the ideal kind of positive to move forward, is being able to share data with one another. We also need someone to translate how that data is relevant, right? And there are some people, it seems, who are especially gifted at this kind of thing, and they need to take the lead in being able to translate, data across disciplinary boundaries. It's hard, though. I'm chuckling a little bit as you ask that question, because it's very hard to put into practice.
Hi, I'm Cynthia from the
Hi,
College
Cynthia.
of Business. I'm a
Great.
doctoral student. I have a question about how you foresee internet and online resources facilitating this interdisciplinary sort of research. I study social networks, and there's a lot of social network analysis done in a lot of different disciplines, and I've found some incredible open source data sources online, so I think that could be a way to facilitate, and I was just curious what your thoughts were.
I think that's very closely linked to the question that Micah raised, Cynthia, that this is, we're going to be pushed into this, I think. So I almost am of the mindset that we need to figure out how to deal with it, how to have common language and common spaces for sharing data, because we're going to have to. That this is, having more open access data is really the wave of the future. Now, it can be analyzed in different ways, right? According to our disciplinary conventions, and published in different types of journals, but this will be a huge step forward. Yeah. No. John. Oh, great.
I think it's fair to say that universities, especially public universities across the country, are under siege. Certainly true in Texas and in Florida. And you shared wonderful insights kind of about what characterizes the internal dynamics of university and different disciplines. How does this play out, if at all, in terms of the public domain and helping our legislators and indeed the public better understand what we do?
I think, frankly, I'm just going to be really practical here. I think it gives us a better public face. If we can join together and explain our research in terms of very pressing social problems, it makes universities appear indispensable. We already know that they are, but it makes them appear even more so. And I've noticed that people outside, I've had the privilege of working with some scientists recently on different kinds of initiatives related to, say, helping scientists more effectively communicate with religious people and things like that. I have very particular languages, and I even think of myself as being fairly conversant in how to talk to people in other disciplines, but it makes you a lot more honest about your work and the kind of insider languages that you have. So I think it also deepens your work and helps it be much more publicly accessible. Like, this is, being able to explain our work to one another is a first step to being able to explain our work beyond the academy in the broader public, and help legislators understand how truly indispensable American universities are. So that's, I do see this as part of the process. That's a wonderful point to raise, though.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Joseph.
Yeah.
I think maybe we need to interdisciplinary teams.
Yes, to work with.
I have no idea what this does. Is this working now? Is it working at all? I think. Oh, there we go. All right. My name is Joseph Hellwig. I'm a
Hi,
cultural
Joseph.
anthropologist.
Oh, wonderful.
I teach in the Department of Religion. Our university almost lost its anthropology department, unfortunately, and I was very grateful that religion welcomed me. I guess I have more of a comment than a question. It seems to me that a lot of the backdoor or backstage conversation that needs to take place is about epistemology. And I'm thinking of a couple examples. I teach about religion and the neurosciences in some of the, in a course that I teach. And I think the name of the neurobiologist who does this work is Pittinger. I think he's at Penn State. He has this notion of the God helmet. It's not just a notion. I mean, he actually has an experiment designed to stimulate the brain in certain ways that give his subjects the impression that they are seeing spirits or ghosts. And people are so convinced that their discourses about this experience resemble those of people who have undergone shamanistic experiences or spirit possession. But the challenge, it seems to me, is to understand across disciplines what data is. So for Pittinger, data has to do with what happens at the neuronal level. And he's interested in sort of getting at some sort of substratum, a cross-cultural difference. Whereas, for instance, the anthropologists who have studied Siberian shamanism, for instance, are interested in the context and how a particular context shapes religious experience. For a neurobiologist, this is of no interest as far as I can tell. And that then goes to the level of what constitutes data. And if science is about capturing data and explicating it, then I, as an anthropologist, have no data to even begin a conversation with.
I think that's a very important comment. These issues really run deep, and my comment about understanding how culture is played out, right, and has to do with power and power relations is very much related, I hope, to the kind of comment that you're making. So in university systems where the sciences are kind of at the top of the pecking order in how we define things, if we define things only in terms of collecting quantitative data and getting grants, right, then what place is there in the conversation for the humanities? That's why I think the way that this seminar has been framed in terms of what can the humanities give to the social sciences and to the natural sciences is an extremely important way to frame this. That we will be really lost if we cannot put these things in perspective with the insights that humanists bring us. I really firmly think that. But you're raising basically the most fundamental issues that, how epistemology, how we know, right, and how we think we know about things needs to be held in context of its cultural framing.
May I just make one more comment? I'm thinking of E.O. Wilson, the biologist from Harvard, his attempt to create a kind of blueprint for interdisciplinary dialogue, his book Consilience. And from what I can tell from that book, again, it falls into the same epistemological traps. And as a cultural anthropologist who teaches about kinship, and sort of I revisit the debate about sociobiology, again, one faces that sort of
That's right.
Issue where genetics don't actually give you the constitution of kinship systems around the world. That's a cultural question. One doesn't even know how to account for the origins of that. But understanding how kinship is constituted is data. And there is about 100 years of anthropological data that is a huge quantity of data in terms of quantifying things that I think biologists who deal with genetics are simply uninterested in it because it's not about genes. Just another point. But
Yeah,
thank
I think
you very much.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. And it helps us understand, too, why people want to protect their disciplinary spaces and resources, and how, the way that different disciplines are viewed in broader university structures really shape these discussions.
We have a timeout on the mic, but you can go ahead and ask your
Yeah.
This may just take you a little bit farther down this road, but earlier you said the relationship between, I'm Rebecca Miles, by the way.
Okay, Rebecca, thank you.
You mentioned that the relationship between sociology, maybe specifically, I think the social sciences and the natural sciences is fraught, but then you went on to paint a picture of the wonderful contributions of the natural sciences to the social sciences, but you said nothing about the fraught part.
Yeah, no, I think it gets back to these kinds of issues that are raised. So right now, people who do not do quantitative work, right, feel like their social space is really being eclipsed by those who do quantitative work. I think that's a very real concern, and where is the qualitative in social science? And that's why, perhaps I should have said a little bit more about that. That's why there is a huge push now even to quantify qualitative work. And I've gotten back reviews from journal articles that just demanded that I explain things numerically that cannot be explained numerically. So that's and that's really how I've started to be thinking about. And it's important to remember too that while social scientists may view themselves as natural scientists do not view us as scientists. And that became very clear in my study where I looked at both natural and social scientists. And so that shows that there's a real power disparity there, right? If we think in that kind of relationship as science kind of being having the upper hand. I'm not sure that it necessarily should, but that practically I think that is the way that it plays out. Come on, help us end on a more positive note. Yeah. All right. All right.
I don't know. I think I'm going to insert some of my opinion in the question as well. But, there seems to be
Where's our moderator?
Yeah. I don't know. I feel that there might be a paradigm shift in our entire world in terms of how we think about knowledge and information, and I think we're facing a lot of complex problems as a result of a lot of social developments in our world. Really complex stuff, and so we're rethinking a lot of things, and at the core of it, I think we're rethinking a lot about what it means to be educated, what forms of information are important, so that we can develop knowledge that's going to help us move forward in our race, in our species. I'm sorry.
What's your field?
Oh, I'm sorry. Jordan Andrade. I'm e-science librarian at Dirac.
Oh, great.
And,
so you see this. You're on the front lines of this.
Yeah. I think you might say that. Sure. So there are a lot of really big changes going on, and so I think at the level of the academy, this discussion here is one of those big changes. And so my question is can we, as an interdisciplinary group, look back in the history of our world and the development of knowledge, information, education, and see this occurring at some time in the past, and see how those challenges were addressed in the academy at that time?
Yeah, we almost need a vibrant history of knowledge to turn its lens on this very topic, and I'm sure there are those who have. I have not, unfortunately, but we almost need our disciplines to understand what's going on here, because it's certainly embedded in a historical context. And part of this is driven by very practical needs. And I did this here, but you'll hear others do this, explain it in terms of the necessity of solving social problems, the necessity of getting grants, these kinds of necessities, rather than it being some kind of intellectual ideal. And usually, the university moves forward not as a business model, but out of intellectual ideals. And so our whole language for talking about interdisciplinarity now is being very much shaped by our current cultural milieu. And that needs to be understood and put out there and examined. But you raise very good issues about the historical embeddedness of this conversation as well. So, all right. Well, thank you very much again. This has been very rich.